Ignoring the evidence won't make it disappear. Before we end this chapter, let's quickly look at one last issue. At this point, you might be wondering, in the face of so much evidence, and there is more, how can some people claim with a straight face that the Synoptic Gospels do not depict Jesus as divine? Again, who cares? Everybody's divine. There are lots of different ways to get around the evidence. Consider, for example, the words of Bart Ehrman. Even in the Gospels, Jesus appears to have a heavenly body during his earthly life, one that can walk on water, for example, or be transfigured into a radiating glow in the presence of some of his disciples. But it is important to remember these Gospels were written by believers in Jesus decades later, who already knew that Jesus had been exalted to heaven. As storytellers told the stories of Jesus' earthly career, year after year and decade after decade, they did not separate who Jesus was after his death, the one who had been exalted to heaven, from who he was during his lifetime. And so their belief in the exalted Jesus affected the ways that they told their stories about him. Do you see what Ehrman just did? He knows full well that there are accounts of Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels that reveal that Jesus was a divine human. But when faced with the evidence, in order to maintain the theory that Jesus does not claim to be God in the earliest sources, Ehrman plays up the idea of a time gap between the events in the life of Jesus and the writing of the Gospels, and includes the theory of anonymous storytellers. The telephone game strikes again. You already agreed that it was way later, and a lot of them weren't eyewitnesses, so why? I don't see how there's disagreement. He does this precisely in order to make the Synoptic Gospels' evidence for Jesus' divinity effectively disappear. What evidence? Some guys wrote some shit down? In this way, the accounts of Jesus' disciples and eyewitnesses are transformed into tales told later by followers who made up stories about Jesus in which he spoke and acted as if he were divine. But as we have seen in earlier chapters, there's no evidence that the four Gospels are the end products of an anonymous chain of storytellers. Is there any... He's got, the burden of proof backwards. Is there any evidence that eyewitnesses wrote down what they saw? There's no evidence that the Gospels are the last link in an ancient game of telephone. Again, backwards. Is there any evidence that the named people who saw it happen wrote it down? Instead, the evidence is that the Gospels are based on the testimony. Okay, good. Testimony of eyewitnesses to the life and ministry of Jesus. Luke 1:1-4 and John 21:24. And the Gospels, including the Synoptic Gospels, are very clear that during the stilling of the storm, again, storms calm down, walking on water, I did that stunt, and the transfiguration, ooh, he's glowing! Jesus of Nazareth did and said things that only the Lord, the creator of the universe and the God of Israel, could do and say. According to who? With that said, we are still left with the question, is Jesus' divine identity, something that he reveals only privately to his closest disciples, or does he ever speak about his divinity in his public teaching? And why does Jesus command the disciples not to tell about what happened during the Transfiguration? Why the secrecy? In order to answer these questions, in the next chapter, we will look more carefully at the secret of Jesus' divinity.